Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Redditors who live in areas with extreme weather. What's the scariest situation you've ever been in? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Back in university, a group of friends were stumbling home from the bar in midwinter at minus 30 degrees Celsius weather. One friend lay down in a snowbank and decided she was going to sleep there. Other friends walked away. Luckily, they came back 5 or 10 minutes later to get her and make sure she got home okay. People have died from passing out on snowbanks in the cold like that. There was supposed to be really bad snow starting around 8 p.m. I was visiting a friend's place about 40 minutes from home, and I left to drive home at about 7. It was snowing, but not that hard. Within 10 minutes, I was trapped in a freeway traffic in legit blizzard conditions. Your headlights hit the falling snow, so they don't light up the road as much. The wind is blowing the snow around so much that you can't see where your lane is, where the edge of the road is, anything. You're just desperately staring at a tiny patch of illuminated white in front of you. I accepted that I would probably end up in a ditch, or else someone near me would try to brake and set off a chain of events leading to all of us colliding. I decided to take the next exit and rent a motel room, but I couldn't get up the hill that the motel was on. I had to turn my wheels and let my car spin out as it slid back down the hill, and then I did my best to get control at the bottom. I got back on the freeway and miraculously got home. My roommate started laughing and said, "How the did you just drive home?" The city got shut down for a week in a state of emergency for a freak once-in-a-100-year snowstorm. Stores were closed, the power went out. You weren't allowed to go on the road unless you were an essential worker. It got really cold, and there was limited food in my cupboard. I got really lucky that the power came back not long after my phone battery died. We all thought it would be the most newsworthy event of the year. 3 months later, the pandemic hit, and everyone forgot about Snowmageddon. I live on an island in Maine that's an hour's ferry ride from civilization. The boat comes 3 days a week, typically, but there are a lot of times they cancel due to weather. This one particular day they probably should have canceled, and I wouldn't have even gotten on, but I needed to make a flight for my friend's bachelor party. The swells were washing over the boat, and a couple of times it rocked so far that I had one foot on the floor and the other on the wall for balance. One of the windows cracked from the force of a wave. I'm not normally too stressed on those boat rides, as I trust the captains to be good judges and know what they and the boat can handle, but that time in particular really made me consider that I might drown in a freezing ocean. My neighbor thought he was having a heart attack, but it was in a snowstorm, and there was no way that an ambulance would get up the driveway through the deep snow. So I went over and started shoveling. Suddenly, a pickup truck with a plow on it came flying out of the blinding snow and nearly ran over me. It was terrifying. It turns out my neighbor called someone who had a truck who came to help. I've had lots of close calls in winter, but being hit at high speeds by a big hunk of metal is scary. I was once leaving my girlfriend's apartment in the dead of winter in northern Arizona. She lived at this complex on a super steep hill. I'd driven back and forth all the time with no issue, but it had snowed and warmed enough to melt a little and then refroze when the sun went down. So the hill was essentially a car-sized circus slide you go down with the burlap sacks. Right as I started my descent, I felt my car start to drift. I was 19 and had mono, so when I started sliding, I way overcorrected and essentially slingshot my car into the curb, completely snapping my front axle. I limped it to a grocery store and told them I'd tow it in the morning, but when I came to get it, figured out the next morning they were in the process of having it towed. It was an effing nightmare. The crash and snap I heard from inside the car will never leave my mind. I was driving up to a ski hill after a snowstorm. Not having a great deal of money at the time, I hadn't invested in winter tires. There was a tractor trailer in front of me, a car to my left, and another car behind. Something shifted in the passenger seat, so I took my eyes off the road for a moment. The right wheels crossed into the shoulder and lost traction. The car drifted to the right onto the shoulder. I would have gone into the guardrail, but the snow had piled up against it, forming a natural curb that my car bounced off of. Between steering the car back toward where I wanted it to go and the car bouncing off the snowbank, my car, still without proper traction, started drifting left. The truck ahead had begun to slow, but I didn't want to brake for fear of losing what traction I had. So my car makes its way sideways across the lane, and I prepare for whatever is going to happen when I sideswipe the vehicle one lane over. But just as I hit the center of the lane, my tires managed to grip the road again, and I resume moving straight forward, tapping my brakes at this point to prevent myself from rear-ending the truck, which was now right in my face. It feels like an eternity typing it all out, but the whole event couldn't have taken more than a few seconds. In the end, the only thing that my car made contact with, other than the road, was that snowbank, and that didn't even leave a mark. And when I got home from the ski hill, I bought myself snow tires, because even though snow tires are expensive, no way in hell was I letting that happen to me again. I was pretty new at driving, and coming home from work late one night, I decided it was the perfect time for my first drive across the lake, Minnesota. Things were okay for the first few minutes, but as I got closer to the center of the lake, I started getting nervous. It was really hard to see anything except the plowed path in front of me, and I realized I had no idea where I was going to come off the lake, or if the path even went all the way across the lake. So I decided I would turn around and go home. As soon as I backed up off the plowed area to turn around, I was stuck in over a foot of snow. I tried rocking the car, tried putting my floor mat under the tire, which just ended up flinging the mat 20 feet behind me, tried digging out with my snow scraper, but the only thing I succeeded in doing was breaking a fingernail off, causing my finger to start bleeding. This was way before cell phones, so I finally decided that I needed to start walking toward home. I was probably 3 or so miles away. Unfortunately for me, the wind chill was about -20, and I don't know if you've ever tried to walk across a frozen lake on a windy night, but a lake is pretty flat, and there's nothing to shield you from the wind. By the time I got off the lake, I was seriously thinking I was going to die of hypothermia. Not long after, I reached an area with houses, and my extremely introverted, shy, and socially awkward self bravely decided that I needed to knock on a door for help. Someone finally answered. I explained my predicament and asked if I could use their phone. I called home, feeling relieved that help was within reach and enjoying the warmth of this stranger's house. And my younger brother answered. I told him to get Dad. He said, "Nope, haha." I told him he wasn't funny and I needed help, and he hung up on me. I called back, but he must have left the phone off the hook because I only got a busy signal. After trying a few more times and feeling increasingly awkward, I decided the only thing I could do was to walk the rest of the way home. So I did, my burning hatred of my brother and plans to beat the crap out of him keeping me warm. I made it home with only one little spot of frostbite on my finger, a hole in my glove. My brother got read the riot act by my dad, as did I for driving onto the lake, and the next day, Dad drove me back to get my car, which thankfully hadn't been towed. I haven't had any interest in driving on a lake since. A few years ago, around Thanksgiving, it snowed a foot overnight. I was homeless at the time, riding my bike, trailing after a heavy bike cart that had a flat tire as the sun was going down and snow was starting to fall, and I was sweating and exhausted because of the flat. I pulled into a parking lot to rest for a bit, unzipped my outer jacket, sat down, and promptly fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night with half a foot of snow on top of me. It took something like 10 minutes for me to be able to move any part of my body at all. I managed to eventually stand up, grab a blanket from my cart, and drag myself into a dumpster enclosure to wrap up in my blanket between the dumpster and wall. I don't know how I didn't freeze to death that night. In Buffalo in 2006, we had what was dubbed the October storm. I was working an overnight shift at a group home by myself. In the middle of the night, I noticed snow coming down hard, like January hard, in October. It was relentless. I'd never seen so much snow fall in such a short period of time. Shortly after, I noticed the sky looked like it was on fire. When I managed to open the door and get out, there were shit tons of electrical wires down and sparking because of the weight of the snow. The entire sky was bright orange. I thought the roof was on fire. It was terrifying. As soon as daylight broke, the entire city was buried under snow. I stayed that way for over a week, $530 million worth of damage. My best friend was supposed to get married on a day when we had a blizzard. Of course, the reception was canceled, but they were still hoping to get married. The pastor lived near the church they were supposed to be married in, and said if they could make it in, he would be happy to perform the ceremony. The interstate was closed most of the day, but finally in the evening it opened. They said they were going to try. I really wanted to be there, so I hopped in my car and headed out. I was driving down the interstate, admittedly going a bit faster than I should have, when I started to slide. I overcorrected, and it turned into a full 360 spin. I vividly remember facing the headlights of the other cars on the interstate that were heading toward me. Also, it turns out that if you spin out, your engine turns off, so I couldn't even drive once I pulled out of the spin. I managed to coast to the shoulder, where I was able to restart my car and make it to the church in time to see them get married. I was the only person who wasn't immediate family that made it, and was very happy to be there and alive. Cyclone Larry in 2006. It was apocalyptic. Neighbors' roofs were torn off and cutting power lines. Big rocks hurled through windows and huge pine trees were bending further than I could have imagined before, finally snapping with an almighty crack. That was the worst part. I still vividly remember sitting in the laundry with my family, mattresses up against the window, and we could hear the storm coming from ages away because of the sound of trunks breaking. It sounded like a huge monster was tearing its way inland, breaking everything in its way to get to us. We knew it was going to pass right over us, and all we could do was sit and listen to the beast making its way to destroy our small town. I had a beater of a car that was unsafe in nice weather. I had to cross Wyoming in a blizzard. My wipers were barely working, so I could lose track of the edge of the road. My lights were dim and my tires were bald. If I went too fast, my car would spin out of control and I'd head for the side. This happened at lower and lower speeds until I was forced to keep it below 35 miles per hour. The third time it happened, I was perpendicular to the road in the ditch, and every time I'd get the speed up to get out, a car would come and I'd have to sink back into the ditch. 2 truckers stopped all traffic so I could get myself on and going. I was passed outside of town like I was standing still by an orange truck. I passed him again as he was pulled over. Minutes later, he flew past me again like I was standing still. Minutes later, I saw a guy walking on the road, followed by seeing the truck wrecked on top of some concrete dividers. It was a long night of driving at a creeping speed. At nearly dawn, I pulled over and slept because my nerves couldn't take it anymore. I got home early the next day when it was clear, sunny, and slushy. I'm not going to dad this one, just say that if you know that something's dangerous and it could cause you great harm, I know money's a factor, and I get it, but you're not just putting yourself at great risk, you're putting everyone around you at great risk. And I'm glad it ended up all right, but, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I live near a stretch of 2-lane highway that would close often enough during the winter due to a combination of the area getting a ton of snow and the road being lined by wide open farming fields. One night, despite the road being closed and despite my knowing better, having grown up in snow globes, I decided I was just going to take a short stretch of the highway to a turnoff for the alternate route. It was only about 500 meters long. Turned on the highway, traveled maybe 100 meters, couldn't see anything. The drift buildups were up to the side view mirrors in my truck and had whittled the road down to barely a single lane. I had to reverse the 100 meters I had traveled. A very dangerous, stupidly impatient, and overall highly unintelligent decision. I don't live there, but I spent 2 months helping my grandfather's brother shutter up his second farm as he was selling the buildings and most of the land to live full-time on his main farm. They knew I needed work, and I went immediately from Baltimore up to them in my shitty Ford Focus. About a month after the animals were mostly moved, a huge blizzard hit. But worse, the way his property was, at the bottom of a soft 2-mile slope, the drifts were 20 feet high in some spots, and we were using barrels of burning wood and tires to keep the area between the house and barn clear. The wind was harder than I've ever seen, and the family was saying, They'd never seen it like this in 50 years. Me and the guy's son were taking turns filling a can of gas in the barn to keep the generator running when he fell and broke his leg, which was then set by his sister, a doctor, in the living room. I continued grabbing wood and gas when I started to get a really uneasy feeling. It finally struck me that while in the barn, I couldn't hear the wind on the roof anymore, nor the whole wind facing the side. Then I thought my eyes were working with me because I was getting vertigo, because the joists looked like I was starting to lean. I heard a single loud chip through the silence and noticed it was a window breaking. I ran out of the barn and into the path just as it collapsed. The snowdrift was nearly 40 feet tall, and the old barn couldn't take any more. 30 minutes later, the sun was out. I lived in a place where the extreme weather isn't common, but it does happen occasionally. I had to drive to work in sleet and freezing rain, and the roads were icy, so I was taking it really slow. I gradually turned left at a light, but then my car just kept turning left until I made a 180 and was facing the wrong way in the lane. Thankfully, no one else was on the road, and I could take my time sliding back into the correct direction. I now live in an area where snow is more common than the wintry mix nonsense. I'm much more comfortable driving in snow, but I don't with ice anymore. Honestly, not that extreme, but it could have ended badly for me and my mom. Last year we went to visit a friend about a 20-minute drive away. It was a nice night, no snow, no rain, but it got really cold really fast. Flash freezes and bridges don't mix, especially with a smart car. We hit the top of the bridge, lost control, bounced off one guardrail, ping-ponged to the other side of the bridge. A car clipped us that was coming across the bridge from the other direction, and we finally slammed into the guard wall on an original side. The bridge is over train tracks, and it curved, so the poor person coming toward us didn't see us. Obviously, the smart car was written off, but the worst injury was with me. I got some pretty nasty seatbelt burns on my neck, and I busted the key of the ignition with my leg, and my thigh was pretty bruised for a while. I was more scared of bouncing over the guardrail into the train tracks below. My grandfather had passed not even a month before, and the accident happened the day after my mom's birthday. It is meaningless to say we never made it back to the friend's place. There is still a nice black mark where we went nose first into the wall when we stopped, and for the longest time, you could see the full imprint of the side of the smart car on the opposite side of the bridge because we hit it perfectly broadside on the passenger's side. It's pretty faded now. I don't remember seeing much, but I don't think I will ever forget seeing the wall come at me so fast. This was summertime, but a derecho, basically a land hurricane. We were without power for 11 days. We got a generator a few days before it got restored for good. Streets were blocked with downed trees, and for those who could get anywhere, all the gas for 2 hours in any direction was bought out. For winter, probably the time I flew out east to be my niece's godmother during a blizzard or ice storm. After my flight to Hartford was canceled, I snagged a seat next to the bathroom on the last flight from Chicago to Boston, and that was only available because of a mechanical delay. My brother-in-law saved me and drove across Massachusetts that night to get me. And then we had to go back. We had to reroute 3 different times because of downed trees and or electrical lines. It took 3 hours to get the 85 miles home, mostly on the turnpike. Power was out, and we all, me, 4 kids under 10, my sister and her husband, slept bundled up across the king-size master bed. I wore my sister's sweats because my bag ended up lost for 3 days until my brother-in-law used his sergeant voice with the airline. After repeated unsuccessful calls to United's help center, reduced me to tears of frustration. And I got my suitcase FedExed to the house that day. They got power back after a few days, and my niece got christened a few days later than originally planned in a cold church with no audience. The river behind my house as a kid used to freeze pretty solid, and it was great for skiing, skating, snowmobiles, and whatnot. So we're out skiing, and my folks say to me, "Don't go near the dark patches." Being like 5 or 6 at the time and curious, I thought I could get close enough to explore and see where the danger was. Alas, I don't remember much, except one of my folks extending a ski pole and pulling me out of the water, and then being in snow pants and a jacket completely soaked through, very cold, and hustling right the home. For those freaking out, the river was not deep at all. Chances are good I was able to just stand on the bottom. For whatever reason, there were a handful of spots on the far bank that had started to thaw, but most of the river was still frozen, several inches thick. Snowmobiles had gone past earlier in the day. Had I listened, there would have been no danger at all. It was Snowpocalypse 2010 in DC, which dumped 17.8 inches of snow in a city that wasn't equipped to handle it. We didn't have to work, so I had gone out for the night. I was in my early 20s with friends. I was walking home slightly inebriated and went to cross the street. I had the right of way. And then boom, I woke up on the ground or sidewalk with a bunch of people hovering over me. I started freaking out, thinking I had drunkenly fallen, and insisted on getting up and leaving the situation. The bystanders refused to let me get up and informed me that I'd slipped on a patch of ice and gotten clipped by a station wagon as I crossed the street. Although I felt no pain, I instantly thought that I was going to die and called my parents hysterical as we waited for the ambulance to arrive. I ended up in Georgetown Hospital for 3 days and suffered a fractured nose, 2 chipped teeth, a broken arm, and my face looked like it had literally been mauled. They never found the station wagon or driver who hit me. I'm thankful to the bystanders who'd stayed with me that night. It was just before Valentine's Day, and one even brought me balloons to the hospital one day.